And joining me right now is Mr. Decon Curran.
I'm very well, thank you, and a big thank you for having me on the show. Most honoured and privileged.
Right, and the man I was referring to is Mr. Dan Handley, who has been talking about you on the show and on the Patreon series for quite some time. All things positive, by the way, nothing negative.
No, I have contact with Dan, and he keeps me on the straight and narrow.
He saves the negative stuff for the email. I'm joking, of course.
He's good value.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I like him very much. That's Captain Dan Handley. And of course, as you know, my friend, he's been through the ringer. He's been through all this before. You know, his family and everything. He's took a huge hit in life. But, you know, I admire the guy. He, instead of staying down on everything in his life, the man picked it up and moved forward with his life and made an even better life for himself.
Yeah, he has. And he's sacrificed a lot, as you say, but
right.
He's moved on through it all, and certainly a man with a mission.
Oh, yes. A man with a mission indeed. And he has talked about you, as I mentioned before, and he's told me that you had a book, I believe, 442 pages, by the way, entitled Lies and Deception.
That's right. Yeah, it's going to be condensed down a bit once it's got itself through the professional editing. It'll come down a bit lower because I've double spaced it, and the person that's looking at taking it to the publishers has said, "Oh, we need to condense it down a bit smaller." So that'll be good. I don't know how much smaller, but yeah, it'll be a bit more manageable.
Very nice. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about that book? Just a little insight here.
Yeah. Okay. So I first started looking into the MH370 case, and then I moved on into 17 when I saw the connections, and basically decided at the end of finding out what I knew on both cases that they were intricately connected. And so I decided that the final wrap up would be to produce a book. The book has 370, the one straight out of Malaysia, that's in part one. And then in part two, I address the one that left Amsterdam and crashed in the Ukraine, and then show the connections between the two.
Very nice, yes. The mysterious disappearance of the Malaysia Air 370.
Yes. Okay. Would you like me to run you through that?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Okay. Well, what first got me into this was when I saw that the authorities had been searching in the South China Sea for a week, and they had a lack of information. Their stories kept changing. We found a piece of wreckage in the South China Sea, which China supplied, and then it said, "Oh no, that's a stock photo," and that turned out to be a marine-related piece. And after about 7 days of hearing all these, basically they were diverting away any questions that were asked from the media. And I understand that the people that were waiting for news about that flight were taken away to a nearby hotel, and they were locked in the room with armed security outside so that the media couldn't get to them. At that point, I just thought to myself, I've seen enough and I've heard enough, and I want to find out, if nothing else, just for myself. And little did I realize the magnitude of what I'd be taking on, which took months and, in fact, a few years to put everything together and actually make any sense of it. Because as you can imagine, it's pretty intensive.
That's pretty heavy duty. Good Lord.
Yeah. And a lot of the research I did was usually from about 10 at night till sometimes 4:30 in the morning.
Right.
And the reason for that is, I'm not a professional investigator by any means. And I've got experience of, like, as far as a knowledge of some of the systems on board and how flights work and so forth, having been up on some flight decks prior to 9/11. So along with, I call my training videos the Mayday and the seconds from disaster sort of type things, I learned bits from that. But my investigation side wasn't to say what went wrong from a scene aspect. Mine was to say what happened. Are we being told the truth or aren't we? And the essence of going into it in an investigative point is not to prove that we've been lied to, but to go in there and find evidence that proves what we've been told is correct. And unfortunately, particularly with the Malaysia 17 case, they started off saying, it was a book missile. The Dutch Safety Board did that, and they worked their way back from a verdict and supplied what they believed was evidence to validate it. Both 370 and 17 have been a complete cover-up. They have involved the previous administration in Malaysia, Najib Razak. The current administration knows what the score is, and in fact, I've got in the book an article that the current Prime Minister wrote, which actually says for some reason the CIA or Boeing will not talk about anything to do with the first Flight 370. So to take you through what happened there, 370 departed from Kuala Lumpur on time, about 12:41. The last communication was at about 1:20 in the morning. So based on that, I had a look on, what do they call that? Flight Radar 24. I wanted to see if I could pull up the imagery of that flight and have a look at the statistics down the side, all the parameters to see what that flight was doing with regards to trajectory, altitude, speed. And I noticed various anomalies where it was making quite radical changes as if it was trying to get away from something. The speed increased and decreased.
Yeah, and the flight
altitude
patterns.
was taking turns.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what I also noticed on there was a couple of circles that would come up. They'd come up with a little plane symbol, and there were two of them, and then they would change to a question mark, and then they'd go back to just a little plane symbol. And once 370 disappeared off the radar, these two shot across the screen at what somebody had estimated was about 300 miles an hour. And I think they were fighter jets sent from a military base, Diego Garcia, in the southern Indian Ocean. And I think they were sent to escort that flight back. Two things on that. Our New Zealand Herald, which is our national newspaper, 3 weeks later reported saying that the MH370 performed a series of military-style maneuvers prior to disappearing off radar. And they commented that a large jet like that would only be capable of doing those maneuvers with somebody who is military trained. Now, the interesting thing was that a couple of people reported seeing what they think was an aircraft in the sky, but they commented about the what they saw looked like more an orange glow, and it didn't really match what they would expect to be an aircraft on fire. Based on what I'd seen on that Flight Radar 24 information, and also based on hearing that the Thai military had spotted two fast-moving objects moving in an easterly direction towards 370, and shortly thereafter they noticed one larger, slower-moving object coming back the other way. So I think that the fire that these two people had reported in the sky, my personal belief is, and I don't know this for certain, but looking and analysing that, I'm wondering whether that was afterburners and those fighter jets kicking in. The Thai military did not report anything to anybody else until 4 days later. Their reason for that was that they weren't in their airspace, and as such, they weren't deemed to be a threat, which I thought was rather odd because they could have turned at any point and become a threat.
No doubt.
Now, the interesting thing is, Boeing has denied the systems that are on board their aircraft. And I have to say that the system that is on board that facilitated 370 and I believe 17, both those Malaysian flights, I have a feeling that they were, well, I'm quite sure actually, having spoken to Dan and Phil McConnell, who you've probably talked to in the past, there is a system on board that would have facilitated 9/11. There are no pilots that say they could do the sort of maneuvers that were done. Now, the systems that are on board that Boeing tries to deny are there. It's a system called the Boeing Honeywell Uninterruptible Autopilot. And that system, what it does is the first thing that it switches off because it allows the aircraft to be controlled externally. So the aircraft then becomes essentially a model aircraft that's being flown remotely. And that can be done from another plane. It can be done from a satellite. What happens is they hack into the system that was there for the purposes of redirecting a flight in the case of where there might have been an emergency on board, or there could be a hijacking. Now, the components of that, one part of it is called the ATI. That's an air tranquilizer injector. And what that does is it sends a colorless, tasteless, odorless gas into the system, primarily designed to subdue anxiety. If you increase the dosage, it will send people to sleep. Increase it again, they'll go unconscious. Increase it again, and they will become deceased. And I believe this is what happened on 370, because people waiting for the flight to for some information on Malaysia 370 were commenting about how their phones, the passengers' phones were ringing when they were trying to get hold of them. The Malaysian military and government said, oh no, that's what you will hear is that ringing tone while the switch or the exchange is trying to find the phone. I know that to be absolutely untrue because I've worked in the cellular industry in various positions. And essentially, if a cell phone is trying to be located by the switch, it will it'll have the time frame that you're waiting. Like if you're waiting more than say 5 seconds or 10 seconds for that call to connect, you can guarantee you're either going to go straight to voicemail or it's out of the coverage area.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You'll get that message.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I believe that's what was happening. And I'll touch briefly on the cell phone aspect regarding the first officer later. But going back to that patent, the patent from Boeing was approved in 2006. But the interesting thing is that whilst the product is patented, it doesn't stop it from being manufactured prior to the patent. And Field believes that the aircraft that first received this uninterruptible autopilot was going back to 1995 when the Boeing 777 was first rolling off the line. So what the BH UAP does, the uninterruptible autopilot, the first thing that goes is the communications. And we noticed that with 370, there was an all right, good night, and bang, everything went quiet. That was a convenient place for that to happen because it was on the cusp of 3 countries' air traffic control. Firstly, Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam. And that flight was due to transfer over to Vietnam controllers. So the perfect place to drop those communications and block them out is at the point where Captain Shah is ready to move over to 120.9 for Vietnam. That would normally happen within seconds. And I know myself, having monitored radios, usually within a few seconds, boom, you'll hear them on the other frequency. And that didn't happen. The Malaysia air traffic controller is no longer interested in that flight at that time. So he's going to divert his attention away to other things. Now, the Vietnam air traffic controllers took 20 minutes before they started to raise the alarm. They started calling Malaysia and going, what's happening? Have you got it? They called Singapore and nobody knew who had it. Now, the air traffic control centre in Malaysia, I understand, is based in Kuala Lumpur. As a result of looking through some of the reports, there were 110 vacant positions for air traffic controllers in that centre. And there was only, I think, 2 controllers on that night. One was undergoing training. Okay, so that's an anomaly there straight away on its own. So the aircraft control was passed over to the external hijackers. Now, as to who externally hijacked it, I'm not 100% sure whether that was military or a government. That's something that Field knows a lot more than me. There are elements of both of these flights that I'm not 100% available to give information on because I just don't know. But what I do know is that 370 did leave a pattern of travel. So basically, the ATI then puts that stuff into the cabin when they're ready for it, and the controls are locked out from the flight crew. So essentially they just watch all the dials moving and everything else. They can't do anything at all. The aircraft's now being flown remotely and they have no way of making communications. The ACARS system is still tracking via satellite, but in a 777, they say the transponder was turned off, and I say which one, because there's 2 transponders in a 777, and if there is an emergency on board, the communications are the last to go usually, and there are 5 radio systems available on a 777. So that aircraft did its turn, and it started heading back across Malaysia. What I discovered when I did the investigating is that Malaysia has 8 international airports. It crossed just south of one, which is on the opposite coast to KL and further north. So it's, I suppose you'd say it's the northeast coast of Malaysia. It's an airport called Sultan Mahmud International. And of course, naturally, as part of the investigation, I brought it up on Google Maps. I had to zoom in and find out what this place was. And there was nowhere they could have stored an aircraft. I then got further information that came through stating that at 1:30 in the morning, there were some people, villagers down at the water's edge, who thought a tsunami was coming, is how they described it. And I found a newspaper article that reported this. What happened with that is they heard this large roaring sound, and they ran down to the water's edge, and although they couldn't see anything because it was black, pitch black at night, they heard what sounded to be aircraft engines roaring overhead. They passed the information on to the police at 10 o'clock the next morning. The police were supposedly passing that on to military, but of course if the military's not playing a straight game, then I imagine somebody's shredder got a bit more work that day. So that was around about 1:30. Now the aircraft continued from there, and it passed over near another airport on the opposite coast, and it's pretty much a straight trajectory, and that's called Kawalagi International. And Kawalagi is not far from Penang, and the air traffic control in that area is done by Butterworth Military Base. And the interesting thing about that was that 2 years after the event, ABC Four Corners in Australia interviewed the acting Minister of Transport. His last name was Hushimuddin, a very, very evasive guy. He eventually agreed to have this interview, and he smirked and smiled all the way through, which peeved me, as you can imagine. And he fell into a trap. He was so confident and smug that when he was asked why you didn't send fighter jets up to intercept it, he said to her, to the lady that was interviewing him, well, why do you need to do that? And she said, well, to identify what it is. He said, you need fighter jets for that? What do you want us to do, shoot it down? And she said, well, you said that, not me. And he said, no, I'm asking you because the Americans would. And then he went on and he made one fatal mistake. He said it was late at night, it was quiet airspace, it was a commercial aircraft, we're not at conflict with anybody. And I went, whoa, hang on. He stated 2 years after the event that it was a commercial aircraft. My challenge to him, if it ever went into a trial, is how did you know on that night that an unidentified blip of a large aircraft that had no transponder to identify it, that shouldn't have even been in your airspace, that was traveling through, you didn't send fighter jets up to find out what it was? Why?
Right.
I put it to him. He knew exactly what was coming through, and that's why they didn't respond to it.
Correct.
Now, what annoys me is a lot of these so-called experts, analysts, whatever you want to call them, all say, it had a catastrophic event when it turned. It first made its turn after losing its communications, and there was either a explosive event or a fire or hypoxia or whatever. And I'm going, okay, well, that's nice, but if that happened, how did it continue flying over these other places?
Correct.
So they don't realize that what they're saying makes no sense. The aircraft didn't actually travel in a straight line. It came across the other side of Penang, and it did a right turn. and it headed up the Strait of Malacca, and then it turned right into the Andaman Sea. From there, it executed, I believe, a tight left turn in the Bay of Bengal. And the reason I say that is about a week after they started searching in the southern Indian Ocean, they briefly moved part of the search into that Bay of Bengal area, stating that they had had some pings up there. I believe that's where a 777 would have made its wide arc turn. And coming into where it landed is over the Maldives, which goes over the Chagos Archipelago, and then into the atoll, which is military owned and operated by America. It has Israeli occupation. I should say, sorry, it's leased from Britain. It has an 11,000-foot concrete runway directly south of the Maldives, and it has a checkered history, which I won't go into. But I've seen Google images which are now gone that show B-52 bombers lined up and scorch marks where there were ones parked, that sort of thing. So the aircraft, I believe, crossed over the Maldives and headed in there. Now, there was a sighting going over the Maldives, which was acknowledged by this Pushymuddin Malaysian acting Minister of Transport. And he acknowledged, and his exact words were, "We've had a sighting of an aircraft matching the size, colours and description of MH370. However, these people wouldn't know what they saw, and as such, we're not reading anything into it." Now, this was
crazy.
Time consistent, which he also mentioned. Yeah, time consistent with the time that would have lapsed for the aircraft to have got there based on those turns. They commented about a white aircraft with the stripes, and they said that it was at about 500 feet. They could look up and see stuff, on the side of it, no steps, that sort of thing. And they said the engines were screaming, which, of course, at that altitude they would need to be because of the thicker air and with the flaps extended. Now, they described it as being like a 747, but, of course, if you are on the water looking up as it goes over you, it's probably going to look like a 747 of similar size. And I think those people would know what they saw, given that the main industry for the Maldives, correct me if I'm wrong, would be tourism. And I don't think there'd be 777s going into any of those atolls in the Maldives. Personally, I might be wrong. So that aircraft could then travel in a straight trajectory. And then I had said, okay, that area is all low-lying, it's atolls and that, so that aircraft can maintain that 500 foot. They're saying the aircraft crashed in the southern India, or I should say, I quote, the Malaysian, this military guy and the Prime Minister of the time all said that it was with a heavy heart that they had to report that Malaysia 370 had ended its flight in the southern Indian Ocean. Well, there's some truth to that, in that it ended its flight in the region, in the southern Indian Ocean, but it actually landed on this runway, which is 13 feet above mean sea level, and it's a heavily guarded installation. When I tracked it down, there's talk about photos being taken from this guy with his camera and so forth, and about his fiancée receiving images that were black, and they extracted the information to do with the coordinates of there and found it came back to Diego. I didn't go that far, but what I did find that was very interesting and slightly concerning was, at the time this all occurred, Prince William and Kate flew into the Maldives on the morning of the 8th of March, supposedly to participate in search and rescue exercises. And also at that time, there were 2 annual exercises being conducted. One was called Cope Tiger and the other was Tiger Gold. They are both military exercises, and they involve Malaysia, China, America. There's a few others too in there that I'm not 100% sure of. So on the morning of the 8th of March, I came across, and I didn't save this, but on the 8th of March, there was a requisition order that was filed from Diego Garcia, and it was presented on the internet, and which I didn't save it, but this guy said he was ex-personnel, and he showed the requisition order. It was for a ship, and it was coded for the transportation of people, machinery, or both. That aircraft was the Ocean Shield, and it set sail from Fremantle that same morning. Now, on that particular requisition order, I looked down and I saw, for further information, contact XYZ, and it was highlighted blue as a link. And I sort of thought, well, am I going to look at that or not? Yep, I'm okay. All my antiviral systems and protections are in place. So I clicked on it. It brought up a complete black screen on another tab, and in the middle it said username, login, and at the top it had an American crest, and it said United States of America, Department of Defense. So I basically bailed out of there pretty fast, just in case it could track back to my computer or anything. So we know the aircraft definitely arrived there on that morning. And I believe that the flight that serviced 370, the aircraft, I should say, was used in 17. And that might be something we need to look at covering at a later date, because they're quite intricate.
Right.
But I believe based on wreckage up there and also just anomalies, I believe that the aircraft that serviced 370, which was 9M MRO, the aircraft that was supposed to service 9M MRD, which is Ukraine, because I've got the schedule that shows that flight supposedly cancelled, and Field said they can do that with flights and then reinstate them the next day, because I'd spoken to him personally about that. There's another aircraft, 9M MRC, and I believe that flight somehow played into this whole Ukrainian crash. And as I say, I'll expand on that later. There's just a couple of images there that validate that for me. So I'm just having a look over here now, seeing where we're at. Okay. When I started investigating through everything, I found images along the way, and one of them was of the flaperon. The interesting thing I noticed on that was the lack of marine life that was on that 18 months after the aircraft supposedly crashed, that washed up on a beach in La Reunion Island, and all they got was a flaperon in one bag. Now, for me, I analysed it and said, you've got an aircraft with 3 million pieces. Where's all the wreckage? Where's all the luggage, the cargo, the personal possessions, and the bodies? None. So the likelihood of just those two washing up there out of 3 million said to me that perhaps those items were placed in that position.
Mr. Curran,
I based that on...
Mr. Curran, I hate to interrupt you really quickly here, but just to, add some back story here to what we're talking about, for the newer people out there. Mm-hmm. We're referring to an event that happened March 8th, 2014. Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 vanished. And to this day, they call it an incredible aviation mystery of the 21st century. And 239 people on board were never found.
Correct. I had managed to track down and have communications with the sister of Paul Weeks, who was a New Zealander from Christchurch living in Australia. And he had a feeling, for some reason, he had an uneasy feeling before that flight departed. And he left his wedding ring and he left his watch with his wife and said, in case something happens, each son is to get what he's going to marry. Anyway, going back to that, now the flaperon showed marine life. Cut in any time you need to.
It's okay.
The flaperon showed just barnacles around the outside, and it looked very clean, which to me, for something floating 18 months, seemed a bit odd. The mind-blowing, literally spit your tea back into your cup, was when I came across in our New Zealand Herald national newspaper an article which stated that a ocean-going kayak had been abandoned off the coast of Brisbane, Australia, and the guy had been rescued from that. 18 months, that was also 18 months time lapse, and the Herald had photos of this kayak. It was a proper ocean-going one, washed up on one of our West Auckland beaches in Auckland, New Zealand. and it was covered in barnacles and it had that slimy browny green sludge all over it. And I would have expected to have seen similar, even though they were in different parts. It didn't match what I saw. I also saw a photo showing 4 guys carrying this flapper on, but they were carrying it down the beach towards the water. And I thought, why would you be doing that? You should be taking it away from the water. I think that was staged for photographic reasons. But once again, that's not something I can 100% prove.
Yeah, you can't ascertain that.
Pardon me?
I was just saying you can't ascertain that exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the interesting thing is there were 2 people that were raising questions and wanting answers. One of those was Blaine Gibson, who is an aviation lawyer from America who decided that he'd go on a trip and go down there and see if he could find anything. And he did find some parts. But the interesting thing is that all the way along, the Malaysian, well, their whole search actually, not just the Malaysian government, the ATSB in particular, who I'd also like to pull Australia into court on both of these Malaysian files, because I think they know far more than they have said on both of them. And I would implicate them in a court as well. So they have said in that search area, they searched 125,000 square foot of area, which I believe is just a perfect opportunity for mapping uncharted water. The statement that the ATSB made was, we are absolutely positive that Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 is not in the area we've searched, and we're almost certain that what we have recovered is from 370. Straight away, I thought, how can you be absolutely positive about what you don't have and almost certain about what you do have?
Maybe they're psychic.
So that was a bit of... Well, I believe that they knew the aircraft wasn't there to start with.
Yeah.
They put on a whole PR exercise.
Oh, yeah. It was a massive cover-up.
Yeah, it was. Now, Blaine Gibson found these parts, and he had made contact with the Malaysian ambassador to Madagascar. And he was due to meet with this guy in Malaysia to hand off parts to him, or some important information that he had. The ambassador was assassinated 3 days before they were due to meet while sitting as a passenger in a parked vehicle. Blaine Gibson has received intimidation. He's been stalked. He's had death threats. Why? Here's a guy that's trying to find a plane that supposedly had a problem and crashed, and yet he's getting threats, and this Malaysian ambassador's been assassinated. Now, the interesting thing too is Philip Wood from IBM, who was on board, his fiancée, Sarah Barjik, she commented as well. The same things were happening to her, but her house was ransacked as well. And Blair Gibson was that concerned for his life that he went into hiding.
Mr. Kern, I was just about to ask you, who was on that flight, by the way, 370, the one that disappeared? I was just going to ask you that question, and then you threw that out there, and I said, holy shit. Yeah,
you must have been reading my mind on that. Okay. There was a patient applied for a wafer of a microchip, which is called a Kinetis KL03. And that microchip was on its way from KL to Beijing for final testing. And the patent for that product, which is in the book, was applied for on the 21st of December of 2012. And it was approved on the 11th of March, 2014, 3 days after that plane apparently went la-la land. So that was convenient because there were 5 benefactors to that patent. 4 of those people were on board, and they were the designers of that object.
Interesting.
And whilst I couldn't find them on the passenger list, which was odd. But I didn't rule out the fact that they could still have been there, that somehow they might have been lodged under another name for whatever reason, or maybe they weren't even on the list to start with. But the one person that stood to gain the full benefit of the patent proceeds, millions of dollars, was Jacob Rothschild. Jacob Rothschild owns the company that employed these people, and the company is called Freescale Semiconductors. Freescale Semiconductors is owned by Blackstone, which is owned by the Carlyle Group. Now, the Carlyle Group also owns Booz Allen Hamilton, which is the company that Edward Snowden worked for and subsequently contracted out to the NSA. So Edward Snowden had, as you know, a whole pile of stuff, and that's why he took off with it, because he realized that the world was being screwed over, and he had better principles along the lines of Phil, maybe myself and Dan and others. So you basically say, no, stuff this, the world needs to know about it.
Yeah, definitely. Of course.
Yeah. So there was 20 Freescale employees on board, but also of note was 20 other high-profile individuals to do with electronics, backdoor spyware, military systems. They were from ZTE, Huawei, another company I can't quite recall. They were to do with sea cables going in for communications.
By the way, Mr. Curran, keep that in mind, what we're talking about right now, these events and these people, keep that in mind when we circle back to 9/11 in a little bit, because a similar situation happens with a couple of Raytheon employees.
Yes.
But yes, well, we'll go back to that. Go ahead.
Yeah. Raytheon's hooked into some of the components of the BHUAP as well. So I believe that this event, I don't believe it was just for the purposes of getting that patent. I believe that it was planned that 370 would factor in with 17 later down track, that 370 would be conveniently disposed of in 17. And there's evidence on the scene that highlights that, which I'll go into later. So we've got all these people on board of high value. The Kinetis KL03, it's actually a wafer for a microchip. And
very, very high value, by the way.
Yeah, whatever country has that, it's going to have the most sophisticated warfare in the world. And it's that small that if you've seen the Eye in the Sky movie with Helen Mirren and Alan Rickman.
Yes, sir.
And it shows one of the guys opening a cigarette packet and a blowfly coming out of it, a blowfly drone. And I just went with my tea back into the mug again, because this is exactly this thing is small enough to fit in the dimple of a golf ball. And it's a component of one of these miniature drones, and it makes these things that intelligent. They can be released from a submarine. They can go into a place through air vents. They can release a gas, and they're sophisticated enough to know when their integrity basically is going to be compromised, whether that be swatted out of the sky or exploded or whatever, and they can get the hell out of there.
That sounds like Israeli spy op stuff.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing too is that Israel occupying Diego Garcia, and just touching on Diego Garcia, I don't know whether this is coincidental or not, but if you look at the name Garcia, it's Garcia. It is known as being a black ops, sort of halfway point between Afghanistan and Guantanamo Bay.
Right.
And when you look at the maps of this, you can actually see that there are underwater facilities, because, if you were, say, at a wharf and a container had fallen, then you would be able to see the silhouette at the outline of that. And that's what we are noticing here. So, as I say, I'm a firm believer that it went to Diego.
Many underground submarine ports around the world. For those that aren't aware, they're all over. I'm in California, out here on the West Coast, and we already know there's plenty of ports out here for them. Even in Vegas, there's an underground port that a lot of people aren't even aware of.
Well, down in the South Island of New Zealand as well, there's an area where there's only like a 90-foot place for a submarine to sneak in to one of the fjords, and of course all the rainforest comes down, and so there's right to the water's edge, so there's no occupation there, and of course the top portion of that is all fresh water, and that's where these submarines come in.
Correct.
And fill up their tanks with water. Yeah, so it's quite scary stuff.
Oh, yes.
When you think about it.
This was a massive cover-up. The Malaysian government, and I'm not quite sure. I'm sure there was another government branch that was also affiliated with what went on, but I'm not quite sure what it was. Was this just an exercise, or was just a hit? Maybe it was just a lot of things.
What Field says is that when the first hit with the uninterruptible autopilot was made, that the military, there was an attempt to regain control of that by, I think, the military that were doing this exercise, and then it was wrestled back off them, and the bad guys took it to Diego. And I can explain to you in 17 the elements of that point very, very closely to the luggage and the bodies being off 370 and disposed of in the 17 scene. So we've also got, I think, the ATSB involved, the Australian Transportation Safety Board. They have been very evasive, quite curt. Ian Higgins is a reporter who was with the Australian newspaper. I think it's called The Australian, yeah. And he has written a book, which I've read, that challenged the whole search and the evasiveness of the ATSB. Eventually, the ATSB would not respond to any of his requests for information. They wouldn't answer his questions. They even went as far as to go to his editor and say, we will answer questions from anyone else, but we're not having anything to do with him. He's banned from any contact. So basically, their lawyers sent a thing saying, basically go away and crawl under a rock, which straight away rang alarm bells. I believe that the Obama administration is heavily behind this, as was the previous Malaysian administration, and I'm pleased to say that Najib Razak, the previous Prime Minister of Malaysia, is up on numerous fraud, money laundering, corruption charges. He's looking at going away for the rest of his natural life. And for anybody that wants to look more into that, if you go onto Netflix and bring up a series called Dirty Money, one of those episodes is solely devoted to it. And I thought, I do hope so, because he received $681 million into his bank account to stay quiet. And
yikes.
The interesting thing with that is, look very carefully. Any politicians, I don't trust any of them
I don't either
in the world anymore, because as far as I'm concerned, they're all terrorists.
That's why I like you, my friend.
And I've said that.
That's why I like you a lot. You know, we both don't worship these phonies.
Yeah, I don't care. People say, aren't you scared? I go, look, my parents are in the 80s. I don't have a wife or a partner. I don't have any kids. If they want to take me out for what I know and what I'm going to get out there, be my guest. I really don't care.
Right.
And I'm not working, so I've got no career to be jeopardized.
Yeah, you're not scared.
But no, I'm not. And it needs to be out there. And I've had the time to be able to do it. It has had a bit of emotional toll in places where I've sort of made a major discovery of what had happened. And it really just sat down in the lounge and just held my heart out for about a quarter of an hour, because I knew what those people had been through.
It's wild.
And that was,
these are human lives, you know, so it's pretty heavy.
Yeah. And the thing is, too, that they will take out a flight just for one person. I'd also share with listeners that I went on to do Germanwings and Metrojet. Both of those had the same systems tampered with. And for anybody that's believing the story of pilot suicide with Andreas Lubitz, just slightly tracking away, I can confidently say I've seen sufficient evidence to prove that not to be the case. And there was one high-profile target on board who had previously worked for Booz Allen Hamilton once again. So it all reads like Jason Bourne meets Mission Impossible. You couldn't make this stuff up, and it's actually quite scary to realize the nature of what you're dealing with. And such, and the very last quotation I've made in my book says that I've come to the opinion that the most ruthless and biggest terrorists in the world are your governments.
Correct.
And I firmly believe that, having done this. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. All the reports that came out on 370, you can read between the lines. The current Malaysian administration, they know damn well what's happened because Phil McConnell sent information to them. In fact, he was invited down to Malaysia Airlines to try and explain to them what had happened. And, so the whole cover up that's in there to do with the governments. You've got the Malaysian government sweeping it under the carpet, and as I say, just getting back to the 681 million that went into Najib Rajab's account, and as I say, he's quoted that, I didn't receive that money personally into my account. Well, he's correct in some respects. I understand the money came out of Saudi Arabia, and I think it went via Singapore or Hong Kong through a business bank account and then transferred to his personal account. So it came indirectly. He said, I didn't directly receive $681 million into my personal account. Correct, you didn't. But it came in through other means. It wasn't directly from point A to point B. So the Australian government, I believe, if this was either of these cases went to trial, and I had aviation lawyers who were not only looking for recompense, but to actually hold accountable those responsible, I believe there is sufficient evidence there that would implicate, if you put both cases together, Netherlands, Ukraine, Australia, Malaysia, possibly China, definitely America, because the two hits on those aircraft were all ordered or authorized by no other than Barack Obama. And we all know about his checkered history.
Right.
The other thing too, when the wreckage was presented, once again, they had some bits they put in the New Zealand Herald, our national newspaper, and they said that here is the entire search area of 370, and there have been 20 pieces found. And I thought that's interesting because I've only found 6. So I looked at this map of the whole area and I counted up how many pieces that they had marked, and it came to a total of 6. So I'm thinking, you've got a map showing the whole entire area. You're saying 20 in your leading title, yet you've only got 6 marked. Okay. So there's anomalies all the way through this. I'm just looking at the patent information now. Now, I understand that part of, I don't know whether, I think it was Motorola. Freescale owned Motorola and sold it off to a Dutch company, which I thought was interesting with 17. So looking at that patent, bearing in mind when you're doing an investigation, you're analysing and working things through and going off and doing various research. And I came back and I thought, I'll go onto Freescale's website. And this was sometime around about early, maybe February 2015. And I found in a banner on their main home screen, it said, Kinetis KL03 wins Design Award of 2014. And I thought, hang on a minute. That thing, how could it have gotten to production? It was on board. And then I sort of thought, hang on, if they had got that off the aircraft, they would have had time to have got that manufactured and into circulation in order to have made it for an award, which would have been issued in more than likely December or early January of 2015. So if it had been, say, October, I would have thought, no way. But because it was March, I thought there was plenty of time to get that underway. So that's the nature of what we're dealing with on there. And I've had a lot of contact over the years with Field McConnell when he had Able Danger set up, and he's been able to guide me through some of the specifics that I was a bit unsure of regarding aircraft operations and quizzing him a bit more into Diego and so forth. And as your listeners and no doubt yourself are aware, he's had a bit of grief over the last few years. But I hope he's pulling his way through it without too much issue. So that pretty much winds up most of 370, I believe, as I say, the parts and the bodies moved to be disposed of in 17. And the one thing I say too to people is the 777's only had 5 incidents of loss in, how many is this? 5 since it's been produced in 1995. And they say there's been 4 crashes, but there's been 5 events, which makes me think, well, hang on, maybe they're putting 370 and 17 together. The big thing to look at on that is you've got one of the world's most sophisticated aircraft at the time, loved by pilots, supposedly easy to fly, and you get 2 from the same airline within 4.5 months. What's the likelihood that there's no connection and that there's no coincidence that that's occurred? Over to you.
I had myself muted there. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm sorry about that.
I didn't hear. You'll go through and edit, no doubt, once it's all done.
Right, yeah. I'll edit that part out.
Yeah. I don't know whether you want to tackle 17 as well. Or whether you want to leave that for another.
Yeah, we could leave. Yeah, we could leave that for another discussion. But we'll go back to 9/11 now. But Mr. Curran, I did want to ask you, what exactly got you so deep down into 9/11 and the World Trade Center and the Malaysian Air flight?
I really only discovered the 9/11 situation once I discovered in my hunting on the Malaysian flights, I came across Field McConnell's fictitious setup agency, for want of a better word, Able Danger, and got to know a lot of very specialised people in there. David Hawkins, you probably know of, and he's a forensic scientist. So I learned a lot about how the systems were used on board the aircraft for 9/11 and how what happened, or what they say happened, couldn't have happened in real life. So I hadn't really, before Malaysia 370, I hadn't really got into even really thinking too much about 9/11. But once I started going down that proverbial rabbit hole,
right,
on 70, I knew I nearly gave up at the start. It took about 3 or 4 months. But as I went into that, I was aware of the uninterruptible autopilot system, and that awareness came from the Able Danger family, for want of a better word. And from there, I was able to go and pull the patent and read more information about it, what it does, and the patent and its description and purpose is going to be presented in the book as well. So 9/11 and 370 and 17 used, well, also Germanwings and Metrojet all used the same onboard technology to achieve the ultimate goal. And what really, if I can say it, pisses me off,
that's all right, yeah,
is that these people can do this sort of stuff. Coincidentally, for the 4 flights I did, there's 911 passengers and crew in total. And I thought, I can't stop with what I started to discover. I had to put it into reports. Then I had to document it further. And from there, I set up a Facebook page called Aviation Crashes. And I also set up a Wix site, which is aviationinvestigator.wixsite.com/aviation. And all the information that I had, videos, audio, reports, pictures, the works, and also some blogs that I did and reports are all available on that website.
Nice.
Because
okay.
I thought when I got through the investigation, once I really got a handle on 17 and I really got a handle on 370, because obviously while I was doing one, the second came along, so I was sort of juggling 2 at once. And about just before 17 happened, I got to the point where I was ready to give up, because it was a hell of a lot of long hours into the night researching and investigating and just trying to find things. And I would liken it to, say, a 2,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. Some parts are missing. Some parts are there they're like a smoke screen, and just some other parts that just don't belong at all. And you've got no picture to show the end result. So the piece that I might need to link, say, G to H, that piece, or I, that piece in the middle might not come for anything up to 12 months down track. So you're investigating portions of it, and it's only down track when you come across some gold that it connects and you go, there's the bridge between that. Now, the interesting thing was that acting Malaysian Minister of Transport, that Hashimuddin guy, he did a couple of things which I was quite disgusted with. I saw a video of a press conference over 2 years down track, which was held in Malaysia, and one of the Australian reporters was there, and he asked twice this Hashimuddin guy to explain why 2 years after the flaperon was sent to Toulouse in France for metallic analysis, why we had not had anything back in writing regarding that. And he panned it off saying, I'm not fully briefed on everything. I'd have to go away and find out, etc. And that was just before the interview that he had with the ABC Four Corners lady. And I know that fact because it's on video, and I saved the whole video, the documentary, and I was gobsmacked. But he bounced away, deflected away from the question. And when it was pushed that second time, this little Malaysian woman minced away across the back of the conference hall, turned on one of the microphones at a lectern and said, that's all the questions the minister will be taking. Thank you, the conference is now over. And I thought, yeah, that's not surprising. So the current Malaysian administration, they know full well what happened, but they are in a position where I won't say necessarily duress, if that's the word, but they know that if they put the truth out there, then certain people will just mysteriously disappear off the earth, off the planet. And I read nothing's really ever final, but I read their final report, and reading through that over 400 pages, I think there's about 2,000 pages in total I've read of reports for both cases. And in their case, they sort of moot they hint at the whole electronic hijacking without actually coming out and saying so. And I thought it was interesting that the Australian Transportation Safety Board had commissioned Curtin University, a marine department there, to do a marine analysis of the pieces and like where they do the drift analysis and all that. That report was also just over 400 pages. Interestingly, the now current and above board Malaysian administration, they covered the marine life in 2 pages in their report. And to me, that said it all. So I think they know absolutely without doubt what the truth is. But if people want to remain alive, then I think it's a case of we can't say anything about this because too many people could be conveniently disposed of. And that's
right.
What saddens me, is that this whole thing, we'll take a whole flight out just for a few things. And I think to myself, not on my watch, you don't. I'm going to do everything I can to expose it. And I just think, how dare they take somebody into a court and try and charge them with manslaughter over maybe an accident and lock them away for like 20 years. And yet these, whatever you want to call them, they can do it and get away with it just because of where they are and who they are. Well, sorry, they're no different than you and I, other than the self-proclaimed title that they give themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think many people...
So that's basically 3 separate...
Right. Many people out there, those that have been following along here, and if you are very further interested, I should say, about this, you can definitely connect the dots between MH17 and MH370 quite easily.
Yeah, and that's where it starts to get really interesting. So if you like a good Ellery Queen, a factual mystery novel, I really describe it as the nearest thing to reality to a Jason Bourne movie, to be honest with you, because we're talking about that sort of magnitude with what's going on. And so the problem is that when the movies come out, and people see all these things, they're telling us what they're going to do in the movies.
Yeah.
So that when it happens, people will say, oh, well, that only happens in the movies.
Only in the movies, right.
So hidden in plain sight. I mean, all the information was there if you wanted to go and hunt for it. And one last thing I must mention to you that I missed was the plane sighting going over the Maldives. In one of the 7 books I've got and read on 370, of which I also got some information, the acting Minister of Transport for Malaysia, that Hasanuddin piece of whatever, he said there 2 years later that the flight that the 10 fishermen saw passing over the Maldives was a Maldivian Airlines scheduled flight, which was a Bombardier Dash 8. So I thought, okay, well, let's go and have a look what a Bombardier Dash 8 is. And it's a 50-seater turboprop. And I thought, okay, even if you don't have 777s flying in and out of the Maldives, I think the difference between those aircraft would be well and truly like looking at a Fiat Bambina against a Rolls Royce. Yeah, it's going to stick out. It's not something you can mistake yourself for seeing.
That's a good comparison, by the way.
Yeah, well, I think, the 777's not going to go in and out. I don't think of the Maldives. The runways aren't big enough for it. And probably not built for it anyhow. And why would any airline send a 777 in at the expense for the limited number of people that they'd probably be carrying in there anyway? Because it'd be pretty much tourists. So the whole thing, when you analyse it, fits together. And one of the things I got from an investigator that had made some comments about how you conduct an investigation was that you bring all the information to the table, and the only way of really finding the truth is eliminating what you know doesn't belong. And that's why certain people, a woman from America who will remain nameless, but her initials are CN, who was actually banned from attending the 777X launch at Boeing because she had written some scathing articles about the battery fires. The Boeing said, don't bother turning up because you won't be admitted, which I thought was quite great. She kept me up till 3 o'clock in the morning to connect with Skype, killed my first call, and then sent me an email saying, oh, sorry, I thought you were someone else. I don't have contact with anyone unless they've read my book. She, where this fits in is she did a presentation, I think it was over a breakfast in Singapore to about 100 people. And her theory was that 370 had one of those events shortly after executing its left turn and then crashed from there. And I thought, well, if that's the case, how come it went for 6 or 7 hours and still managed to turn 4 times and didn't make any communications?
Yeah, that wouldn't add up.
And so, if these people actually stop, they're supposed to be specialists, and I just go, yeah, whatever. If they actually stopped and looked at the ludicrousy of what they're presenting, in my mind, that a 5-year-old has more experience than them. I have no respect for them at all because they're just buffoons. And if they did the investigation with the thoroughness I did, they would see how absurd their statements are, because they just don't fit with what we know. And what we know, a lot of, has been presented by that corrupt previous Malaysian administration. And they've validated things as either being not true or being true by what they've said. And that's how I've been able to go, right, that did happen. So, yeah, but that's basically 370 in a nutshell. 17 is another ball game, but the two of them are definitely intricately connected.
Oh, they connect, all right. Yeah.
For anybody, I was just going to say, for anyone that thinks that a book missile brought down MH17, no, there wasn't the case. And was Russia responsible? No. I have actually sent the Russian government an email saying to them that I've done an investigation on it, and in my opinion, you are 100% innocent of this, and there's evidence to prove it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I was just going to say, even though, I'm not a big fan of Putin or Russia for that matter, I still don't think they were responsible for that.
No, they weren't. And they went to present information to the Dutch Safety Board, which would prove that they weren't involved, radar imagery, satellite photos, And the Dutch Safety Board said, no, we don't want it. We've got the information. Russia's guilty because we say they are. And I thought, what the hell is that? That's not an investigation. You can't just accuse them of it because you want to accuse them. And no matter what Russia has said and done, they refuse to accept anything. So when they had their commission thing come up, their preliminary meeting over 17, I listened to it for all of about, I think, 2 days worth of limited hours each day. And I just thought, I can't stomach this anymore. I'm going to projectile vomit for that last day
Yes.
because the whole thing's just a complete and utter cover up.
Oh,
a cuckoo clock going off.
very nice. I thought somebody was running into the room there. But yes, it was just the clock. Ladies and gentlemen, don't worry. He's okay.
Yeah, it's just me going cuckoo.
It wasn't a government agent at your door. Everything's fine. No worries, people. It's okay.
No, I've had them monitoring my communications, though. Our spy agencies. Somebody I know is connected with one of our ones here, the GCSB and the Security Intelligence Service, and he said the beep tone, the DTMF tones that I got randomly throughout my call are required by law to indicate that your call is being monitored. But usually when I told them to plop a donut in their mouth, stick an umbrella up their butt, wait for the two to connect and push the button, they were gone. The echo on the line had wound up. And I used to say to them, look, listen and you might learn something about your world rather than sitting down there, doing all the bollocks that they do for these governments. And I never thought I'd say it, but I don't trust any politician, whether it's for the countries, whether they're nationwide or whether they are statewide or otherwise, even your local councils. I don't trust any. I always say to people, I wouldn't trust them to take a dog for a walk. And seriously, I wouldn't.
I'm with you on that one. I've always said the government is actually the enemy of the people. They're not your friends.
Yes. Yeah, and I never would have said that. Back before 370, I thought the world was just, Mary Poppins, everything ticked along relatively okay.
Everything's all honky-dory, right?
Yep, but once I got into 370, I suddenly realized that everything I believed and had been told about the world was nothing short of a lie.
It's a lie. Yeah, as you get older, you'll realize, well, I'm not talking about you, but I'm saying the younger generation out there, the younger listeners out there, as you get older, you'll start really seeing the world for what it really is. And you'll start seeing that money is really the ultimate influence, the ultimate the prime directive of everything, the driving force behind the evil in man. As you know, man is wolf to man, Mr. Curran.
Yeah. Well, I'm at that point where I say to my parents, they're in their 80s and I've got various health issues, which will probably knock 15 years off my normal lifespan.
Oh,
I'm
no.
57, I think, at the moment.
You're still a young man. Don't worry.
Yeah, I really don't care because I say with all the crap that's going on, I just think, oh, good, get me the hell out of here because I get to the point where I know this will probably sound stupid, but I'm actually ashamed to be human in some respects because of the way that I see the world has gone.
Yeah,
and
well,
so much hate and so much war that's been created.
Mr. Curran, human behavior is just gross if you think about it.
Yeah, it is. And it's a me society. How can I do you over?
That's right.
More power, control, money. And I just think, if I dropped $100 bill on the street, it would be interesting to see how many people would run, just pick it up.
You'll see a fight.
I just think, oh, whatever.
Yeah, you'll see some fights there.
Yeah. So, but this has certainly been an eye-opener for me. And, of course, as 17 came along, then my friend who's got the spook connections, he said, he'll ring sometimes down there and the phone will pick up and then terminate. And then a few moments later, his phone will ring back, which is interesting. And he would stick his iPhone in his pocket and sit on it. He said, that's when my screen's cracked. I said, why? He said, because I don't know who's monitoring and listening in on my calls when I come to visit you. And he even said there's evidence within the police to prove that there was more to the massacre in Christchurch that happened a few years ago. He said there's a lot of what happened in there that
All
public
right.
weren't told about.
I forgot all about that. Yes, the Christchurch shooting, by the way. I forgot all about that. The M16, the guy went in there, the mosque, and shot everyone up. He had great aim, by the way. I did see the video.
Yep. Well, I saw the video too. And then the thing, just touching on that, I know we're digressing away from Malaysia, but
yes, sir.
The thing I noticed with that was for all these people that were in there with their, top to ankle white outfits, all the bodies were piled up in one corner. There was no blood splatter anywhere or no red marks I could see. And I'm watching supposedly the actual video that they banned and stopped people from accessing. And I thought, they're not banning the access of that so that you don't get upset and sort of traumatized. They're doing it because they don't want you to see what wasn't there that they claim was. But I don't know the full ins and outs of it, but I certainly know that what actually went on there and what we were told are not on the same page.
The video did seem a little odd. The video that I did see up on YouTube for about an hour and then it was removed, that footage was very unusual. There were some anomalies. I won't rule that out. But yes, I did see those bodies. Yeah, the way it looked very unnatural, the way they stacked up in certain parts of that video, no doubt. And, I don't mean to go into, for those out there that are thinking, oh, now you're going into crazy conspiracy world. But to be honest, if you look at that video, you see these bodies sort of pile up in a very unnatural sort of state. That is questionable, though.
It's like they've been dumped in wheelbarrow loads.
Yeah.
And what I say to people is, a lot of people will say something's a conspiracy. And I say, well, that's easy to say if you don't understand it and you haven't accessed the information and you're going on what the so-called officials are telling you.
Right.
But what I've done with my investigation is whenever I've sat down at my desk, everything around me, it's like a seeing eye dog having its harness put on. I go into work mode. And my emotions, thoughts, feelings, or opinions on anything, they don't matter. I have to go and trawl for anything and everything and then bring it back to the table. And one of my, couple of my statements are, the first is the truth never lies.
Yeah.
And the other is dig, sift, and evaluate. And that's what I do. I might get information, even if there's a real way out conspiracy. Oh, the captain was found in the hospital, or the plane, the 370 plane crashed in the Vietnam jungle. And I will still go and look at those items and analyze it with an open mind. And you see on YouTube presentations where if you scroll down under some of the things that you find, you'll see people saying, oh, I think this happened, and someone else thinking what they think happened. And then they lose sight of things and it becomes a verbal abusive slinging match. And they're not able to separate the I'm right, you're wrong. My way of thinking is something is a conspiracy theory until it's proven beyond reasonable doubt with validatable evidence, which I think I've managed to find that pieces this together. And I found a lot of stuff on this file. I didn't want to find stuff that I saw. I actually found stuff and I fought with myself to go, nah, there's got to be a reason for this. And so I would spend possibly hours trying to rule in or rule out whatever it was I found, because it just seemed so far out there and it just seemed crazy.
Well, Mr. Curran, I got to stop you there and just tell you that, for the longest time, people thought that the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing was bullshit. But now we are seeing the amount of evidence that's stacking against Ghislaine Maxwell now. The prosecution reveals nearly 3 million pages of evidence stacking against her. So this is bad news for everyone.
Yeah, when you go back to 9/11 with the Commission of Inquiry and the report put together on that, I understand there were 18 pages redacted. And my way of thinking to that is, if you're going to do a report and those 18 pages are important enough to be in that report to begin with, then why are they redacted? There has to be something in those 18 pages that basically gives you the key to unlock the whole thing. And to me, It's, oh, well, why tell people about it? Why not just put the report out without the 18 pieces? It's like saying, I've got a secret. Oh, tell us. Oh, no, sorry, we can't tell you. Then why tell them in the first place that it was there? And apparently, when people go, I think there's a room in Capitol Hill that has information pertaining to 9/11, and any of the congressmen, senators and that go in there are not allowed to take recorders or cameras. They can only take a pen and notepaper, basically, and take nothing away from it. And I thought, well, what does that tell you as regarding transparency? And yet we're supposed to drive down the road and we get an infringement if we're, speeding. And yet these people can get away with murder and they don't have to face anything. It's like, well, hang on. Where's the fairness in that?
I know, right? It makes you wish that you worked for Enron during the whole scandal, right? No one gets in trouble if you are a CEO, but your fellow colleagues, your fellow employees, they're going to get fired. Except you're going to get a raise. How lovely! It's
like you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, and it's not so much what you know, it's who you know. And I think that's we could go into all sorts of dark avenues, but with me having started this. It's really, it's a bit like a spider's web, because you start on the outside of one strand and you find yourself in the middle, and then you can't help but be exposed to this other stuff, because some of this other stuff is connected with the Malaysian flights. It's connected with the other flights. And you don't want to rule it in, but you can't rule it out.
You can't rule it out, but it's all the same. It's the same people, the same faces, Mr. Curran. If you look deep into it, they're all the same. It's all connected. I mean, Mr. Curran, the FBI had information prior to the events of 9/11. I mean, there was events going on that morning, very similar to what happened.
Yeah, CIA.
Yeah, very similar to what happened with COVID-19. We all knew what was going to happen. Well, at least the government did, but no one did. No one did anything. Kind of like all the shootings that happened, Mr. Curran. Just like all the shootings that have gone on the last 10 years. The FBI, they've always had prior knowledge, but, they wait till the last minute to do anything.
Did you hear of the CIA officer who knew 6 months ahead of the 9/11 attack?
Not quite sure at the moment. Memory's
foggy. There's a lady that basically, she was intimidated and she was locked away because she was speaking out about it. But she was apparently a go-between between Afghanistan and the White House.
Oh wait, so I've interviewed her. I've interviewed her way back in 2015. It's a blonde lady, I believe. I'm forgetting her name, but she has been on the show.
And she's got to watch now wherever she goes that what she says so she doesn't get tripped up. And it was interesting how she had said that how they were saying, don't be in New York anytime around the middle of September. And I thought, isn't that interesting?
Was it her name?
All the bigwigs happened to be out of town at the time.
Was it her name like Susan or Elizabeth?
I couldn't honestly tell you. But I do recall seeing one of the video presentations that she made on it, and just thought, my God. And a similar thing happened to a lady that was a virologist reporting directly to Dr. Fauci, who I call Dr. Fisi.
Dr. Fisi, I've never heard that one before.
Yeah. Wow. And she said, the stuff that happened there when she came up with papers on HIV and all this sort of thing, and how it was stolen, and she had evidence planted to try and implicate her in things. And she had said that in order for anything to transfer, any virus to transfer from an animal to human would take up to 800 years, and that a vaccination would be anything up to 10 years. And so she said there's no way that came from bats. There's more to that. And on the news, they didn't report about the Chinese and American scientists who had come out of Wuhan, and they were coming in via Dallas Fort Worth.
By the way, her name is Susan Lindell.
Ah, righto. Yeah, I remember seeing that video. Just to quickly finish on the COVID thing. Yeah. Now, apparently, I saw the video anyway, and it had the United States of America Department of Justice crest behind it. And the top dog there said that these two had been arrested with, I think it was 21 vials of this virus.
I remember reading about that, yeah.
And that Yeah, and that they were supposedly facing up to 5 years in jail. And I thought, hang on a minute. If you went out and murdered someone, you get 20 years. What gives with this? My understanding was that that virus was released intentionally out of the Wuhan laboratory.
Right.
And that $3.7 American was put in by the Obama administration for their Harvard professor and the Wuhan scientist to collaborate together to work out how they could take that virus and make it more transmittable and more fatal. That tells you the type of sick psychopaths that we're dealing with.
Right.
And that's the best way I could describe it, psychopaths.
I hear you. I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
It's just remarkable what's been going on the past year and a half now. Well, it almost seems like a year and a half. I'm not sure if it's exactly been a year and a half, but I mean, it seems like it seems a lot longer. But yes, if you look through the history and you see our dealings with China and the Wuhan lab, it's very nefarious, and it goes back to Fauci, and it goes back to Bill Gates, and it goes back to all sorts of individuals. And yes, wasn't there another whistleblower who was found dead inside her home? I think her name was like Brandy Vaughn.
I know there was a Chinese scientist there who got the hell out of it and got to the States, and she was
that's another
talking
one
about it. But interestingly, too, just to sidetrack on that case, I was watching a Australia 60 Minutes production a couple of nights ago, which was talking about the American university student that had gone to North Korea, and how they ended up torturing him for, I think it was about a year and 3 months. And when he returned home, he died 6 days later. And just the torture that he was subjected to, I was gobsmacked. And apparently what he was alleged to have done, he couldn't have done because he was out with the other people on his tour group, and they didn't get back to the hotel until about 3. And this incident allegedly occurred about 1 in the morning. So, and the CCTV footage that they showed was that grainy, you couldn't even work out whether it was a male or female because the CCTV camera was at the other end of the corridor. And this guy confessed to something that really he had nothing to do with. And I was a bit disturbed to see that when he came back, he was blind, deaf, in convulsions, and he died 6 days later. And I know it sounds horrible to say, but probably the best thing that could have happened to him when he got back was actually passing on, because I can't imagine what it would be like to live if you were blind and deaf and having gone through that torture, basically.
Yeah, you got traumatized.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Severely.
He got traumatized to the point when he came back, he was gone. There was unfortunately no hope for him. And I don't think he actually would have had anything to do with it anyway, because one of the women that commented said that everybody in that group was told to get on the plane and leave, and he was plucked out of that group when they were boarding under armed, under, they had weapons pointing at them, and he was at the very back of the line. So they plucked him because he was the last one going down the air bridge. And had they been left for a short time longer, maybe another 5 minutes, everything would have been fine. And they wanted somebody to be able to hold hostage because of all the sanctions and so forth that America was putting them under. And they wanted to basically say, well, we've got one of your citizens, so ha, ha, ha. It sickened me to watch it. It's just sad to see what these people all go to.
Well, man is wolf to man, Mr. Kerr. And yes, there was lots of that going on. And of course, not to mention, or I forgot to mention rather, Professor Bing Liu. I'm not sure if I pronounced his last name correctly, but he was a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, and he was on the verge of making a breakthrough in the scientific understanding of the new coronavirus. And it says here he was shot dead, by the way, in his own hometown. Gunshot wounds to the head, neck, torso, by the way.
Doesn't this remind you of the whole Clintons? I've always said they've got a list of bodies that would embarrass an undertaker. And I've got a name for them, named after a certain body part, which I probably shouldn't say. It's not a rude word, but I call them the clitoris twins.
That's hilarious.
That's for Hillary and Bill Clinton.
Well, you're not wrong. You're not wrong, though. I mean, if you do look at the list of names, it goes way over. It goes way over 30. All the people that were, I guess, involved with.
I've heard as long as 50. You put people like Seth Rich in there. It just stacks up. The boys on the track case with the CIA and Billy Boy, Bill Clinton, running weapons down to Cuba, and I think it was, and bringing back Billy Chugs, and these two boys, I think they were about 12, witnessed the plane landing and that. And of course, the interesting thing about that was, they got hit by a train. Well, it's like, well, how come then one's got a bullet hole to the back of the head and the other one's got like a knifing or something like that?
Yeah, that was
along those sort of lines. So
that was the cocaine scandal.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. It's a wonder that every time Bill Clinton comes out, he's not got bloody white powder all over his face. But I had to laugh when the campaigning was going on for the election that Trump got in, and Billy Boy was sitting there fairly close to the front, and there were 4 women that had made allegations of sexual interference by him, I think possibly rape, and he turned around and saw them, and his face just went white.
Yes, and by the way, another funny thing I love mentioning here on the program, because so many people always bring this up, the war on drugs and blah, blah, blah. But you have to understand, the CIA is the one who actually manages the drug trade. They always have, and they will continue to do so.
There's 3 organizations in the world that I would not even trust. They are the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI. There's good and bad, obviously, in both. But to me, I say to people, the CIA represents basically the Democrats' version of mafia, essentially, because they run, as far as I understand, they run to their own tune, and they don't account to anybody. So, when you've got an open ticket, hey, let's go wherever we want and do whatever we want.
That's right. I just think it's hilarious when people ask, why doesn't the U.S. government in particular, why doesn't the U.S. government just shut it down? They have the power to do so. And I just laugh and say, well, you're going to have to shut down the CIA.
Well, exactly. And look what happened to J.F. Kennedy when he was saying exactly that. He wanted to dismantle it and see exactly, what the hell was going on. It's interesting, actually, because when I rang Talkback Radio here one morning, I set the host up. It was throughout the whole country. I set him up to fall on his own sword. And he had gone about this virologist who was under Anthony Fauci and saying, she's written a book and she's isn't she an anti-vaccinations? And I said, no. Her words were that she's pro-vaccine therapy.
Right.
And then he tried to discredit the video I mentioned of the professor and the Chinese woman coming into Dallas Fort Worth. And I said, well, you can't argue when it's got the crest in the background. But here's where I stitched him up good and he didn't know what to say. I thought, I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to see whether or not you can stumble into it. And I says to him, it's interesting when anything comes up that's outside the normal spiel, the person's either deemed to be crazy or it's a conspiracy theory. And I says to him, do you know where the term, and I said, I don't deal in theory, I deal in fact. And I says to him, do you know where the term conspiracy theory came from? Who coined it up and when? No, I don't. I said, okay, shall I? That it was coined up in 1955 by the CIA as a way of discrediting anybody who stumbled on the truth to try and make them look like an absolute fool. Thanks for chatting. See ya. And I said, and I basically ended the call before he even had a chance to. And I thought, well, there you go. Eat that one up.
Yeah, well, there's no point of
right.
No point of discussing further with someone like that. Someone without any evidence or any information, no leg to stand on. To be honest, to even have this conversation with you, Mr. Curran.
Yeah. I look at it this way that, with people that perhaps challenge me on the Malaysian flights, I'll say to them, why do you challenge that? Oh, it's way out and the media says this and that. And I go, hang on a minute. You're taking what the media has said, the mainstream media, as being absolute 100% gospel, but you've not gone and checked their facts or validated it or did the research for yourself. I said, I have, and I know that the information I've found, the evidence, not only conflicts with the mainstream media, but it actually fits together, and it's got to logically fit together. If I'm driving from, say, California to New York, and I said I got to New York, and yet you knew I crashed in Las Vegas, how could I have made it to New York? And it's the same with the Malaysian flight. As soon as they talk about that whole plane crashed after it turned, I'm thinking, but you could have made radio communications. It's the last thing to go.
Right.
And people don't think like that. They just think, oh, well, we've been told this and that. Well, they're too trusting. I deal in, as I say, in fact. And when you get information that you don't want to, I get a lot of stuff on both of those flights, and I thought, I don't want to believe this. I can't believe it. It's not right. It doesn't make sense. And it just seemed so way out there. It was like I was reading a movie script. But at the end of the day, I realized that whilst I had to look at everything with a completely neutral, open state with no opinions or preconceived ideas, I couldn't argue with the evidence that I was seeing. And I just thought, I don't want to believe this, but I have to, because the evidence is screaming at me and showing it. And that's how I was able to put it all together. I think if I'd let emotions and so forth and opinions and all that come into it, I don't think I could have achieved what I achieved.
Yes, you have to separate yourself from feelings and emotions to be objective. When you become emotional, that's when people get hurt. That's when people get shot. You make irrational decisions and you're gone.
And you have to be able to leave behind your own world, and essentially when you step into doing your investigation, it's a little bit like you extract yourself from the world. That's why I would start looking at 10 o'clock at night, because you come across something, and for starters, I didn't know anything about all the airports, and I didn't really know what a 777 was comprised of part-wise, size, all that. I knew it was a large airport. And so you end up, for example, it's crossed over an airport, but you think, well, where is it and what is it? So you have to actually park your whole investigation. It's a bit like leaving your shopping cart in the middle of the supermarket. You might have to walk right to the end and then pick something up and bring it back and then say, oh, okay, now I understand better, and you can move on with your cart. But it's not a simple start shopping in one point and work your way to the checkout. You could go backwards and forwards through the years, different aisles, and bits where you thought there was stuff that you'd left behind. You go back and it's either moved or it's no longer there. And that's where I saved one article that implicates the Obama administration in Malaysia 17. I found these two articles that had been written. I think the guy's name was Eric Schultz, not quite sure. And he had presented two items that were saying how 17 was brought about and who instructed it. And I decided when I found them that I'd save them onto a Word document. And as I was going back and checking links for the book, those came up with 404, page not found. And I thought, well, it doesn't matter. So I could copy and paste them in my book. And basically, as I put them in, I thought, stick that one where the sun don't shine on Obama.
Yeah.
Because you're implicated in it. So you know when you've put something, you found something, if you haven't captured it, and you go back and you can't find it, it generally indicates that what you found had to have been on the mark, because it would have still been there.
Yes, and Mr. Curran, I have to bring this up to your attention here. As you know, the world has been at a standstill over COVID-19. It's plagued everyone, basically. I'm curious what the scene is like out there for you currently right now. And when you first heard of this virus as well, by the way, I just want to quickly say, when you first heard of it, what did you initially think? Go ahead.
When I initially heard of it, I had a fairly open mind. And then as soon as I heard it had come out of Wuhan and there was a laboratory potentially involved, I thought, okay, this is interesting, and nothing, you can't. We've got a problem at the moment where a lot of prejudice, against different races. And I think, hang on, you can't blame the Chinese people for this. You can blame the Communist Chinese Party for covering it up and not telling us. And that was my first thought was, why the hell didn't they lock things down and do something about this before their problem became the world's problem? New Zealand, once we had our first case, which was in March of 2020, we went into a lockdown, which was, I think, for about 4 weeks, and we managed to stomp it out. And then we got a couple more cases coming through. Some of them were after they'd come in from overseas, and they were either skipped going into quarantine or it hadn't been detected when they were in quarantine. So we went through another lockdown for about a week, and where we moved into recently with the America's Cup. Just before that, we moved into a level 1 where it was basically stay at home, stay in your region. It reminded me a little bit of going back to Russia or Germany in the war time. Having pretty much show your papers if you want to leave your area, prove who you are and where you're going and why you're going there.
Yeah.
But now I'm pleased to say at the current status for New Zealand is that we have no community cases. We have managed quarantine facilities still. And what has happened as of yesterday is that our Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, has said that the travel bubble to Australia will be opened up on, I think she said, the 19th of April, which will allow for trans-Tasman flights. And per our news broadcast on TV last night, they have said that both Qantas and Air New Zealand have put on, Qantas being, of course, Australia's national carrier, both Air New Zealand and Qantas have put on for that initial day an additional dozen flights each. So they're definitely going to be carrying people. But then we've still got to look at what if a case pops up, because it's a bit like sprinkling water on a gremlin. If you can keep the water away, fine. But as soon as that water hits the gremlin, all hell breaks loose.
Right, yes.
And it's the same thing. So the question I have is, can this be completely and utterly stomped out and dealt with? And the simple answer I have for that is I honestly don't know. But I certainly look at this COVID-19 thing around the globe, and it amazes me that I sort of compare it in some ways to the Holocaust, with the gassing of the Jewish people, and it's a modern form of genocide as I see it.
I believe so too. I mean, Mr. Curran, is it safe to say that you are also under the notion, as well as I am, that this was some sort of bio agent?
Yeah, I think so. It was definitely designed to do the damage that it did, and the way that it attacks the lungs and squeezes the air out. They've achieved what they want, because as we know, and your listeners probably know about the Georgia Guidestones in Atlanta, I think it is, in Georgia, and how their mission is to reduce the world population from something like 7 or 9 billion down to 500 million. And that pretty much says it all. But having watched a documentary on that, it's still debatable as to who produced those upright stones in 10 different languages, who produced them, and when did they get put about. So there's it's like on the flight cases, people go, what happened here or what happened there? And I go, well, I don't have every component because I wasn't on board. But what I can do is share with people what I have found. And as I've said in the book, here's your unique opportunity to look within the investigation and see how I went about it, what I found, how I pieced it together. And then at the end, I leave the reader to make their own assessment. The COVID-19, I've heard that COVID standing for Certificate of Vaccination Identification. And certainly we're seeing, I'm not sure what country it is overseas. I think it might be in Australia, where they're thinking about bringing in you can't travel unless you've got a certificate showing that you've been vaccinated.
Of sorts. Yes, sir.
Yeah. And I just went for a test myself on Sunday because I've got a bad sort of head cold that's come in and been hocking and hacking. And I thought, well, I'll do the right thing and go for a test just to rule that out.
A peace of mind.
Which has come back negative.
Oh, I was just saying you did it for a peace of mind.
Yeah, I just wanted to, because got similar symptoms. I mean, I've got a rheumatoid arthritis condition called Sjogren's syndrome where my immune system attacks itself in the salivary glands.
Oh, my.
So I'm used to sort of coughing up fur balls like a cat. And so when I got this thing hit me, I thought, well, I better do the right thing and go for a test a couple of days after it hit. Thankfully, I'm on my own. And one of the first questions I asked is, can my cat catch this? What I think it is. No, your cat's fine. I said, that's all that matters. So I did the test on Sunday. I got a text message back on the Monday, and they said, no, everything's fine. Negative. They send you a text message back. And I thought, well, it's only probably right that I go and do that and rule that out. And I still felt guilty having to go out anywhere. I'm sort of holding onto the shopping trolley with my, hoodie sweatshirt thing right over my hands. So it looks like I've got no hands, holding onto the trolley and trying to sort of move around, avoiding people, thinking, well, I might not have COVID-19, but I don't want to spread whatever I've got. So, so hence why when I'm talking to you today, a little bit snowed under. It's turning my New Zealand accent into something probably not quite what it should be.
No, you have a great accent, by the way.
Oh, do I? I don't like the New Zealand accent. I think it's bland.
Well, the American people, they love the UK accent. They like the Australian accent. They like the New Zealand accent. They love accents, to be honest. They're suckers for it.
I listened to a radio station out of Cairns where I lived for a little while up in North Queensland in Australia. And when I hear them talking sometimes, and they're very sort of twangy, and there's one woman when she reads the news, she's very sort of like, and down in Cairns at the moment, and I'm thinking, oh my God.
Very high-pitched, nasally, yeah.
Yeah, they are. And it's funny that there's no consistency to it. You'll get different accents, like some of them are really whiny, sounds like they've got, tweezers on their nose.
Yeah.
And others don't. There's not sort of really any consistent pattern. But I think Australia is definitely becoming more Americanized as far as things like federal police and state police and just the whole structure of Australia I see very closely drawing to, unfortunately, what I see unfolding in the States. And I have to be honest with you, when I see the way some of these cops behave in the States, I think, my God, how do you guys deal with it? I'd be bloody petrified.
Yeah, a lot of people are.
The George Floyd case at the moment. And I see on the TV news last night, the captain of the police force has thrown the guy under the bus and said the force was excessive, which I also agree with based on what I know. So if he gets sent to jail, I'd say he's going to really want to keep his identity well and truly under wraps. But I think it'll be a bit late because I think the prisoners will have seen him on TV.
It's a very complex case, Mr. Curran.
It is.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one for the jury to decide.
Well, I think too the other thing with that I heard through various non-mainstream channels was that George Floyd and him knew each other because a connection in the same nightclub. I don't know who did what. I can't sort of bring the full evidence to the table, but one was
something like that. Yeah, they worked in the same facility, the same nightclub, but not at the same time. They didn't. They're saying they never met, but I don't even believe that, to be honest. I think they did probably know each other. And another thing I have to say, Mr. Curran, about that whole situation is what people seem to forget for some odd reason. They think they have the freedom and the right to resist arrest. But no, I mean, if you had common sense, you just listen to what the uniformed man is telling you, or else you get a nightstick or a gun to your head. I mean, I've always felt that way. I'm out here in California, and I lived in Los Angeles before, So, I know the way the police are. So, you resist arrest, you're going to get your ass kicked. That's the way I grew up. That's the way I learned the law. Well, I mean, I didn't get beat up, but I knew plenty of people that did.
Yeah, I think the thing too there is with you having a gun, able to bear rights. I think it was the Second Amendment. And I think that, when you look at here, we don't have police armed. And some of the grief that gets thrown at them. And I think, I personally think the police here should be armed. And the reason I say that is because there are that many drug and gang related events happening now where each day we're hearing of firearms being presented. In fact, we had not so long back a young guy who was, I think, about 27, and he was doing traffic enforcement within the police. Stopped somebody in West Auckland on a routine traffic stop and got shot dead. And it's just, he wanted to go on and do things with the criminal investigation branch and that sort of thing. And, I think that if they're not armed, how do they defend themselves? And people are saying, we don't want to arm the police. Well, why not? The criminals are already armed. And I think that when you know that a cop's standing there with a gun on his hip, you're only going to argue with him once.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it's over.
Well, it's the lack of common sense. I'm as liberal as the next guy, but I mean, you do have to have some common sense in this world. People are not good. I mean, they will harm you if you let them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that if you're going to have an effective police force, you can't just go up to them and say, I've got pepper spray, let's be a nice boy and come with us. It just doesn't work. And I certainly wouldn't want to be putting my button on the line for it. And in fact, one of my neighbours, their eldest son, he actually left the police force for some years, and he's now gone back in again and joined. But the situation that he encountered is in a small rural town of New Zealand. He was at a door of a private residence where him and his colleagues were telling him to open the door, and when the door opened, he had a double-barrel shotgun staring him in the face.
Damn.
And that traumatized him that much that he left the police, and it took him years before he went back, probably good 2 or 3 years before he went back. But it was handy to the police because he was able to help his other students in the whole process of going through police training. He could help the instructor, so it made his job a bit easier. But right. I think they definitely need to be armed because we've had some horrific cases over the years where we've had policemen shot, and we've also even had they'll even go and try and kill a police dog. And you've got people like that if they're on particularly drugs, they don't have any rhyme or reason. There's no rationality to what they do. They just act on instinct. So I think arming the police is in everybody's benefit because the criminals are already armed as it is.
Yep, they're armed and they are emotional.
Yes.
So they're rational.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you don't bring a lighter along to a forest fire.
That's right.
You've got to be able to tackle it with properly. If you're going to just turn up. It's going to be like that squeaky woman out of that Police Academy movie.
Yes, great film. By the way, Mr. Kern, we are running out of time here, but I've been having a great time. I've been having a great time talking to you, and I definitely want to bring you back on the program. We'll discuss all these things further. And yes, the book is entitled Lies and Deception. And, I can't wait to read it, to be honest. By the way, where can people find it exactly when you do release the book?
Well, I'm hoping I've got a chappie at the moment who's based in Albuquerque, I think it's in New Mexico, if I said that right.
Yes, sir. Albuquerque.
And he's looking at getting the book through and get it all formatted and professionally produced. Not sort of pushing forward in any hurry on it because he's got other projects as well. And he has said to me, are you able to put any money into it? And I said, look, to me, money is something that I can't really put into it. But at the end of the day, I don't want any money off the sale of the book. I'm not writing it for the money. I said the reward for me is to see that book when I stop outside a bookshop to see it there available for people. The whole object of it is to provide the public, those that want some comfort out of what happened, that want answers. It's going to be there for that purpose. I said to him, I don't care if you put the money into it. I don't know, if the book takes off and you make millions of dollars out of it, so be it. I don't want anything out of it. I just want to see it in print, and that is reward enough for me.
Very nice.
It could be another 6 to 12 months away yet. I mean, but Malaysia's 370, as you know, back to March 2014. So we're already 7-year anniversary, and in another couple of months, we're heading into the 7th anniversary of Malaysia 17. So
it's time.
Yeah. Time goes on, but I don't forget. Yeah.
Well, it is time. Yeah, it's time to release the book. Yeah, it's time to release the book, get it out there. I think a lot of people would find it quite useful and a reminder of what goes on behind closed doors.
Yeah, and it's going to also have a flight list of passengers and crew for both flights, and also for those that had anybody connected with the 17 flight. Which I can go into next time. There's a memorial that's been set up in the form of a rose bushes and so on, and a ribbon, and there's about 12 different bushes, and I've managed to copy the list that will have the passenger, and it'll have beside them the tree number and the colour, so you know what tree was planted and where, and also all the instructions with a Q code scan that will tell you how to get there by public transport and all that sort of thing. So that was something I found late in the piece, and I felt that it was a very important portion to put in there in case somebody from the flight that's remaining, obviously, the survivors, family and friends, wanted to be able to access that. That's in the book. It was crucial to have it, I think.
Very nice. I want to say thank you so much for being a part of the program. It's been an honor and pleasure to have you here. We will have to thank Mr. Dan Handley for putting us together here. Great thanks to him as well. And we will do this again, my friend, soon.
Yeah, and I was just going to say thanks to Field McConnell as well, because I found out about Dan through Field. So it's like a little chain reaction.
That's true. Yeah, Field McConnell.
Yeah, I'd love to come back and do MH17 with you, because there's enough to cover on that in one show, and I think the readers will then get to see the connection and will be quite shocked, but probably not surprised with what we see. And I must say too, thank you for the privilege and honour, opportunity of being able to come on and share with your listeners just exactly some of the stuff that they wouldn't have known about unless they'd done extensive investigating, because it was never presented in any form of mainstream media. It was a very tightly closed and hushed up case.
I acquiesce. Once again, thank you so much, my friend. I will talk to you in a few moments here. It's been an honor and pleasure. We'll do it again, sir.
Thank you very much.
Good night, my friend.
Thanks. Good night.
And there he goes, boys and girls. That was our guest, Mr. Declan Curran. Very great guest he was, and I do appreciate all of you for checking out this episode and pressing play once again. I felt kind of bad that I didn't give you guys a live show last week. Once again, thank you so much for pressing play. We will do it again on the other side. And with that said, the world is a mysterious place, and life itself is a mystery. Until next time, mahalo.